All right, we're ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Miami-Palmetto Senior High Mock Student Debate, sponsored by Social Science Honor Society and Student Council. Thank you to TV Production for filming today's event. My name is Mr. Spiegelman, and I teach AP United States Government and AP Comparative Government Politics. I will be your moderator today. Debating for the Republican side, we have Joshua Wang, David Spiegelman, Via Bermudez, and Manuel Lara. Debating for the Democratic side, we have Carrie Ishwaran, Matthew Lewis, Tomas Garcia Puga, and Luke Slifer. Our expert panelists today are Nicole Marcus, Taz Tallis, and Annalise Humeron. The debate rules are as follows. I will ask a question, and each team will have up to 2 minutes to develop and present a response without interruption. After both teams present an answer, we will have approximately 6 to 7 minutes of open debate. Not everyone debating here will be sharing what they personally believe. This is a debate solely for the purpose of understanding political debate. While the topics have all been previously discussed and agreed to by the teams, the questions are known only to me. This debate will be civilized. We will not let either team oppose the other team from getting out their responses clearly. There will be minimal interruptions. Personal attacks will not be allowed. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, with that, our first topic today is on climate change, and our first question is to the Republican side. Here is your question. Is climate change real, and is it man-made, or is it worsened by man? What will the next 4 years of a Republican administration mean to the planet's climate, and what do you say to young people concerned about climate change? Your 2 minutes begins now.
The first two most important things you got to understand about climate change is that, well, 90% of human casualties and deaths over the past 100 years have declined. In the past, past 40 years, 80% of it has declined. And fossil fuels are not an existential threat. They're an existential resource because they add something that's more important than the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is human ingenuity. Health, life expectancy, GDP, that's all directly correlated to increased fossil fuel usage. And of course, climate change is real. But what I'm saying is, in the Biden-Harris administration, what they're supposing, it's not exactly the Green New Deal, but there is a Green New Plan. Biden's proposed Green New Plan. It's about $1 trillion, and what he's suggesting is really not a climate-related plan. It's more of a jobs-related plan because he really doesn't mention nuclear energy at all. He's just focused 100% on wind and solar, even though that nuclear energy is supposedly much more efficient and much more safe. My constituents, you want to add in?
Yeah, I also wanted to hone in on the Paris Climate Accords that the Biden-Kamala administration are going to put us back into. When you look at a statistic from the Heritage Foundation study, it shows that bringing us back into these accords increases the U.S. energy prices with no statistical significant benefit to the environment, doubling or tripling U.S. energy costs, which in fact hurts young people in the economy because the lower class of our economy, when you look at it, they need jobs and it would decrease our jobs and cost America more than 206,000 jobs by the year 2040. And also, when you look at, since we've left the Paris Climate Accords, we're not saying that climate change isn't a serious threat to people, but since we've left the Paris Climate Accords, we have reduced our CO2 emissions.
Follow-up question to the Democratic side. Same question with a follow-up. Will a Democratic administration re-enter the Paris Accord, and will you adopt the Green New Deal, and if so, how do the Democrats intend to pay for it? You have 2 minutes.
I think that the Democrats should definitely look into re-entering the Paris New Deal. It's been shown that with current projections of climate, that entering the Paris New Deal, reducing our net emissions to near zero, and then raising the climate by only 2 degrees will vastly decrease the amount of food shortage that we'll see in the world. We see that a recent study of global vegetable and legume production concludes that if greenhouse gas emissions continue on their current trajectory, yields could fall by 35% by 2100 due to water scarcity and increased salinity in ozone. Moreover, on the fact of cost, we see that the U.S. can reach 90% clean energy by 2035 without raising any consumer costs and actually decreasing wholesale power costs by 10%, catalyzing massive economic growth that will create over 500,000 new jobs per year, inject $1.7 trillion into the economy, and recharge domestic manufacturing. My constituents?
We've also seen that the Biden administration would love to add a $400,000 tax on people, tax on people that make more than $400,000 a year. This would be a massive influence in how we can make the Green New Deal. It would clean up the United States. We've been dealing with higher emissions of the greenhouse gases, carbon, all that. So we have to start cleaning up the country. We have to start cleaning up the world, and the U.S. is a model country to start this with.
We now have 6 to 7 minutes of discussion. If you all would like to ask each other questions, Mr. Spiegelman?
Yeah, I'd like to hone in on what Matthew Lewis said with the Biden Kamala plan with the $400,000 more tax. What that doesn't account in is they're gonna take away the Trump tax plans of cutting taxes. The average American family of 4 saved $2,000 from taxes annually under the Trump tax cuts. Along with this, the tax cuts, the average American family wages increased by $4,000 and all in all. I just don't think that it's economically correct when we need relief and we need support for families the most after a pandemic to drown our economy in a $2 trillion Green New Deal. We need jobs and we need a stable economy. And that's why I don't think the Biden.
And I'd like to ask Mr. Storm, what did you mention? You mentioned green energy. What type of green energy specifically? Because solar and wind are not economically favorable, nor due to the limitations of physics, because they only have a 33% capacity rate of receiving electrons from the sun. So it's just we're largely limited to solar and wind. And the Biden administration is not exactly too enthusiastic on nuclear energy. They're more
Can we get to a
focused.
question?
Yeah, I'm asking which type of energy.
Yeah, so I'm talking about wind and solar, and on your physics constraints, I'm wondering what you're talking about, because there's a massive study by UC Berkeley that was done in 2019, and shows that it definitively shows that wind and solar energy can deliver massive emission reductions and economic growth without reducing consumer costs.
No.
So when you talk about these limitations, it's clear that these don't have any pragmatic implications.
I'm talking about physics. Our current rates are 26% efficiency. The physical limit is actually 33%.
I don't see how it's relevant. I mean, it
Because
shows that
we're
we
at our
need to,
limit in physics.
but it's not relevant.
I
We
have a
have
question
decreased
in regards
costs.
to the waste that will result in the next.
Mia,
20 years.
can you just speak up a little bit? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I have a question regarding then what your answer would be to the immense increase in population and pollution that would result as an effect of an increase in solar panels and in windmills.
So when you talk about a pollution increase, are you implying that a switch to wind and solar energy would lead to an increase in pollution?
I'm saying that solar panels have about a 20-year lifespan.
Okay.
And once that's over, you can't, without like breaking it apart, get rid of the toxic materials in it. And because that's less economically friendly, people would just end up throwing it away. We actually found already just by the way, wind and solar, despite 20 years of government subsidies and work, only account for about 3% of U.S. energy today. And we have already found that these solar panels have been found in remote parts of Africa because we don't really want to deal with the damage because we know that it's bad. Also, to construct these mechanisms of energy, like the solar powers and the windmills, we would have to start a whole new era of mining, which in and of itself is going to start depleting the earth of now rare earth metals and lithium and other things that are required there too. And at the same time, you talked about all the jobs that the Green New Deal would create, but what about the millions of American jobs that would be lost at expense to completely eradicating or eliminating the oil and fossil fuel industry?
Well, people that have been working in the oil industry and the mining industry could have new jobs. They could be technicians. They could be retaught the technician as being technicians for brand new solar panels and the brand new windmills that can provide just as much power, but cleaner and more efficient.
And if I
I would like to ask your side question.
Go ahead,
So-
Mr. Slifer. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So you have admitted the fact that climate change is a threat to our lives in our country, yet at the same time, you have said it is not a threat.
I
So
never said
my
that.
question is, what is your position on climate change? And if you do know that it is a threat, why are you so reluctant to act upon that knowledge?
I think that's a good point. I'm sorry. I think that's a good point that you're saying, and I think that we can both agree that both sides, conservatives and liberals, Democrats and Republicans, we can agree vastly that the environment is in need of protecting, right? As a conservative, I feel the need to conserve the environment as well. I think what happens is that we're differing in the way that we think we should go about those things, right? Whereas the Democrats tend to think that increased federal and even international, like in the Paris Accord, mandates are the way to go, like increasing government regulations and intervention, in which I would say that protecting property rights and encouraging innovation would be the best way to handle
Well,
the situation.
I disagree with that because it seems to me like our position is to act proactively, whereas your position is simply to maintain the status quo. How are you addressing a problem if nothing changes?
There's 1 minute left in the interaction. Mr. Lewis?
Do you mind if I pose a quick follow-up question? What would the conservative plan be for the next, 4 years if our current president is re-elected to help the climate?
Well, I do not think that we would endorse anything like the Green New Deal. I think that we would continue to support the oil and the fossil fuel industry. Since 2018, the U.S. became, for the first time in 75 years, like an all net oil exporter, and we have been doing well because of it. I think that you guys and, well, not you guys, but the support of the Green New Deal fails to acknowledge and the potential repercussions that will result from this type of energy. Energy is not free and it's going to come at a cost, right? Fossil fuels right now are our most efficient way to do so, and I think it would be unfair for, again, the future, if that's what we're talking about, to completely just glorify this idea of wind and solar energy and its efficiency, when we're really not considering the drawbacks that can result from it, especially in regards to waste and the increased cost of energy for just the average American household. And we need to protect the environment, but we also need to analyze at what cost.
Okay. With that, the interactive part of topic 1 is done. Anything from the fact-checking team?
Yes, so we have 2 fact checks that we would like to address. The first one is that the conservative side said that Biden's plan for climate change does not include nuclear energy, but according to Forbes, it does include small modular reactors. And Senator Kamala Harris said that she does support his plan for nuclear energy temporarily while we increase investment into cleaner renewable alternatives. The other fact check that we would like to present is both sides have said that Biden wants to sign on to the Green New Deal, which is not inherently true. PolitiFact says that he does not support the Green New Deal, but he does share some of their goals. Snopes also rates this as a mixed bag, saying that the Green New Deal is a framework for his climate change plan, but it is not the official plan he will be using if elected.
Thank you. David?
Quick question to the fact checker.
Yes. I'll give you guys about 1 minute to do that.
I just wanted to question something about the Biden environmental plan. Their viewpoints tend to shift a lot. Like they said that they were going to ban fracking, now they said they're not. So is that their current viewpoint, or is that a changed viewpoint based on what the people think and how they want to change their viewpoints based on what people think?
So these are 2 official fact checks from Snopes and PolitiFact, and they both say that while Biden has officially stated in the past that he uses a framework from the Green New Deal as part of his climate change plan, he will not be signing on to the Green New Deal and he will not be implementing that exact plan as his national plan.
That framework being their goals, for example, to have net zero emissions by 2050, that's their goal. So they're following down the same path, but they're not representing the same people.
And they won't be signing on to the Green New Deal as an administration.
And then any fact check questions from the Democratic side? Okay, thank you guys. Moving on to topic number 2. The first question goes to the Democratic side. We're going to deal with the national debt. The country faces enormous deficits in excess of trillions of dollars. Yet you propose another massive stimulus package during a period of record unemployment. How are you going to pay for it? You have 2 minutes.
So in the 2006 financial crash, Australia did significantly better than every other developed country when regarding its economy. And the reason for this is largely because they prioritized stimulus package-based economic reforms. They cut interest rates and they guaranteed bank deposits. And all of this, this is something that the Republican Party consistently avoids, and they claim that it's ineffective or that it's impossible to pay for it. The fact of the matter is that we are in a pandemic, and our economy is not exactly in its best shape. We're already on a decline, and the fact of the matter is you need to, it's a very basic principle in economics that you need to spend money to make money, and unless we actually do something in order to get the economy spending again and revitalize it, we're going to continue going down this trend, especially as long as this pandemic continues.
People in the U.S. desperately need help, and by pushing through a new judge instead of focusing on a stimulus package, the president would not work with Nancy Pelosi in order to confirm a new package, which impacts thousands of Americans that have lost their jobs due to this pandemic.
Additionally, 70% of the U.S. economy comes from consumer spending. So for us to, subvert some stimulus package by some inane justifications such as, we don't have the money. The U.S. always has the money. We can take on debt, and frankly, we are taking on debt by doing nothing. So this isn't exactly a change of pace.
I would like to add that when you have a recession looming, it is better to spend too much than too little. This is a founding principle. We knew this in 2008, and even though we knew this fact, we knew that it was better to spend too much than too little, we still didn't spend enough. So the idea that we are ever spending too much when we have a recession that is imminent or in effect is ridiculous.
Regarding
Wait,
2008.
hang on. I have to ask the question, follow up to the Republican side. Does the Republican side promise another stimulus package after the election? And how will you pay off the deficit?
Before we go into that, I wanted to address, they never answered the question about how they're going to pay for it, and then I'm going to go into the pandemic and the recovery fund. In the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, we lost 22 million jobs. That's a terrible thing. We've added back 11.6 million jobs, cut taxes, rolled back regulations, secured $4 trillion in Congress from stimulus, which they want more stimulus. We saved 50 million jobs with the Payment Protection Program, and with all this combined, I just don't see how they don't think that we're not doing enough for the American people. We're trying to get the economy back. The stock market has had a rapid increase since the fall of COVID. If you look, it's a drastic fall in the stock market. Also, if you think that Biden and Kamala are going to be able to stimulate the economy and have economic recovery, the Biden-Obama administration had the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression.
To add my constituent, it took them 77 months specifically to recover pre-recession levels, and also Milton Friedman was the first economist to realize that the deeper the recession, the faster the recovery. You guys are just saying, let's pump out more money and give it to the American people. You're not thinking about the consequences. Our debt is greater than our GDP. You want that? You want to make it higher? You want to dig us? You want to put us in a hole deeper than we already are? Okay, fine with that. But you just got to understand that debt accumulates. We're paying off more interest now than we are in the actual debt. So we got to take into account the numbers.
Also, Trump has proposed and he's pushed through for another stimulus check coming around, but it's actually Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House that have offered resistance for that. So I just wanted to note that.
And you also said pushing through a judge. That was a very short period of time. And the Democrats have had no problem with stalling or doing certain types of things that would take a lot of time from the actual important issues, like pushing a 2-month impeachment trial.
Okay, time. You guys are now open to approximately 6 minutes interactive. I'll give the first question to the Republican side.
So you want us to ask some questions for them?
You guys are communicating with each other now.
Okay, student debt reached almost 500% increase during the Obama as soon as he came into office. Like, what you guys are talking about, when you say specifically, like in the economy, regarding the economy, like what do you want to do? You want to spend more? How much? What are you going to spend on specific? Are you just going to give people cash because what are they going to spend it on?
Well, specifically, I would like to provide some sort of baseline for workers right now. Right now, we're seeing a lot of unemployment. I would propose a job freeze in order to prevent this catastrophe from continuing. I would propose for a higher stimulus package. You see in West Virginia, over 50% of renters are facing eviction. This is not some crisis that we can say, oh, our debt's already mounting. We can't afford to spend more. We are facing serious problems on this country, and we are on the verge of collapse. For us to take on more debt to face this recession is not like some radical policy. It is a necessity for us to continue our economy and revitalize it.
I would like to address the attempted straw manning that our opponents have attempted to do. Look, I mean, nobody wants to pump boatloads of money for no reason. That doesn't make any sense. You act like we're going to shoot it out of a cannon. Look, we want to help people, not just throw money around because it's fun. These are ridiculous assertions that our opponents have made. I would also like to address how our opponents have mentioned a fall on the stock market and attempted to blame it on us. We are not in power. The Senate and the presidency are controlled by conservatives. Any faults in our economy now are under the conservatives' watch, not under our watch.
At the time when we mentioned the economy falling, like when I mentioned the Obama, those like during the Obama administration, I'll let you go.
I'd like to respond to what Luke said, and then I'd also like to comment on what Carrie said. You said that I was blaming I used that as a pivot on how it's come up since the fall. And then I also wanted to say that I agreed with what Carrie said, and it was very reasonable on the problem with debt. And I'd also like to wonder what the response is to.
Because they control the Senate. Like they said it was inappropriate because two different parties, like one controlling the Senate, one controlling the White House. So
Regardless, it's completely constitutional.
yeah, it's not.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I just said that regardless, that it's a constitution.
You have a little bit more time, but you don't.
It's not a matter of right or wrong. Like we can do it, okay? Like you guys want to pack the court. Like just know the pendulum will swing back, and we're going to pack the courts too.
We advocate for fairness, but in life, the reality is that not everything's fair. Life isn't fair, and we just need to learn how to live the best way we can, and one way to do so is guiding our decisions and our political actions off of the Constitution.
Of course,
Any follow-up question then to the Democrats? You're welcome to answer the same question that was asked. My question to the Democrats is very simple. Will a Democratic administration pack the Supreme Court? If so, is that fair?
Well, to start this off, Amy Coney Barrett was pushed through by the same people who said that it was unfair for the people to not vote on a president who would then appoint a justice. This is the exact same situation. Lindsey Graham said, in 4 years, I want you to take these exact words. And we did. And these are people who constituents have elected to represent them. And their views have been widely misrepresented. They have pushed through justice, and it is unfair. I believe that the Democrats do have the right to pack the courts as a result.
I would like to point out that the idea that the Democrats are going to pack the court, Joe Biden has proposed putting a bipartisan commission to investigate the issue. Now, for those who don't know, that is a textbook example of silently killing an issue or a contested issue when you're in office. It sweeps it under the rug. So there is a strong likelihood that Joe Biden will not pack the court. And I would like to add that, it's the qualifications of Amy Coney Barrett are not at issue. What is at issue is the flip-flopping of the logic that has been expressed by conservative leaders in the Senate.
I'm going to open this up for your group-to-group discussion, but I'm going to ask you to consider this question as you have your discussion. Perhaps an answer to this problem would be Congress imposing term limits on federal judges and Supreme Court justices. As you discuss this, I would ask both sides to consider whether or not an appropriate answer would be to eliminate life terms. And because the first question went to Republicans, the Democrats can begin the discussion portion.
So I'd just like to start off by addressing the term limit thing. I think term limits would be extremely effective. Right now, the American system, when it comes to the Supreme Court, I would personally consider to be flawed. this sort of like dice roll that we have of when our justices are going to die in terms of when we replace them. It's pretty stupid if you ask me. Imposing staggered term limits for 18 years would be my proposal. But however, I'd like to go back to the topic of packing the courts. In 1866, we expanded the number of court justices from 7 to 9 to accurately reflect the amount of justice circuits that we had in the U.S., to better represent people geographically. And right now we have 13 judicial circuits. So right now there's reasonable cause to pack the courts. We can justify it with precedent. And I'm wondering, why would you guys be against court packing?
If I may, I just want to say, I want to address the issue that you brought up and addressing the flip-flopping of the Republican Party. And I would just like to clarify that the Democratic Party does the same exact thing. We're talking about politics here in the same way. I can just give you an example. I'm going back on your word would be Biden once saying that he was against fracking, and now him saying that he's not. It's
These
just
are
an
two
example.
completely
It's-
different
Don't
topics.
interrupt.
It's politics, and I'm just saying that is true. That is true.
I would like to
In
point out,
regards to term limits, I feel like Supreme Court justices hold a very important job in our country as a whole. And I feel like with how political the executive and the legislative branch is, it's very important to try to keep the judges as insulated from political factors as possible. And that's why I think life terms are effective in doing that in the sense that they don't have to worry about running or being elected. It's different things like not running or being elected, but they're more insulated from public opinion and political matters in that way, since they can serve while they're paid.
Well, it would only be one term though. It wouldn't be like you wouldn't have to worry about re-election. It wouldn't be like, you have to appeal to the people. It would be the same.
Yeah. If I might add on, you say that lifetime term limits would prevent partisanship in the Supreme Court. Is that why we're having a debate right now between Republican and Democrat? We have wildly different views on what we should do for the Supreme Court. Because right now it's very clear that the Supreme Court is partisan. Because if you look at Amy Conant's confirmation 52 to 48, there's no bipartisan support for it. The Democrats are completely against and the Republicans are completely for. It's clear that the Supreme Court has become partisan. So I ask,
can I disagree with one of my colleagues real quick? So I think that just because it's partisan now, doesn't mean it has to be partisan.
I agree.
Our focus should be on mending this atrocity that we have committed, where we have further divided this country. We have not been this divided since the Vietnam War, the Civil War. Our focus should be on trying to mend these wounds and causes of this partisanship. And I think that the Supreme Court, we should be putting acts in place to ensure that partisanship is gone from the Supreme Court, not that it persists. And I think that the fact that they have lifetime term limits, that has influenced, the whole point of that is to make sure that they don't feel like they have to adhere to the specific things that they say before. And the solution is not to accept the partisanship, but to fight the partisanship.
I wanted to get a clarification on something Matthew said earlier. He mentioned it was a brief statement saying it was about Lindsey Graham and then Amy Coney Barrett, and then you said we should pack the courts. How do you suggest packing the courts? How do you see it playing out? And also, if I may, a question for Luke once that's over. You said about flip-flopping and all that stuff. So how do you feel about when the vice president is running for President Joe Biden, when he's questioned about court packing, he laughs and said that they would let the American people know after the election. Don't you think that's inappropriate on such a major issue?
There's 2 minutes left in this section. Go
Can
ahead.
I answer your question first?
So, in response to David, your point, I believe that we could establish, there's already committees in the Senate, we could establish a bipartisan committee on, renowned judges that we could appoint to the Supreme Court that deserve it, that have the qualifications for it, and that we believe could be bipartisan on the Supreme Court.
Mr. Schleifer?
So, your question about flip-flopping, that's a false equivalency. It's a logical fallacy. These two things are not at all equivalent. You have Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham explicitly saying that he would not do exactly what he did. He said that explicitly in 2016. And it's an issue of honor and opportunism, because it's clear that the position was never in good faith when they, for 11 months, blocked the appointment of Merrick Garland, because they know, I mean, Mitch McConnell's position is basically just, we're doing this now because we can, and we blocked it back then because we could. That's not honor, that's not respecting the sanctity of our legislative process. That is throwing it to the curb. And I don't think that that has any place in a democratic society.
I just guess it's the consequence of, I get the point of it's a consequence of an election, but it's the consequence of Republicans having the ability to put through a judge, and that's why they did it. You have to take in politics, you have to take your opportunities when they present themselves.
They should.
But that's
But
fair.
this was an unfair opportunity for them
If
to
I'd
do
like
that.
to say something, I'd say, yes, you guys 100% had the opportunity, it was 100% within your political power to take that. I'm saying that that's wrong. This shouldn't be a thing. Like, there's clearly some fundamental flaw with the way that the Supreme Court is structured, and I would suggest a change to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again.
I agree with that.
Yeah, you think
Okay,
that's
that
wrong?
time is up on this section. I will make one quick fact check. There was one Republican who voted against Amy Barrett, and that was Senator Collins of Maine. Fact checkers, do you have anything else?
I just wanted to address the thing that we were going over the HEROES Act before, sorry.
Go ahead.
So the HEROES Act, basically, I'm just going to briefly explain. It honors our heroes through money to provide 1 year's worth of assistance, supports testing, tracing, and treatment, additional direct payments, protects payrolls, worker safety, health coverage, stuff like that. And basically, that act was directed towards our first responders through COVID. And Nancy Pelosi basically made these claims that the Trump administration, well, not made these claims, the Trump administration had not yet accepted the House Democrats' proposal for this national testing strategy. But during an interview of CNN, they said that Trump eventually would accept it and the act would pass this past year. So does that answer your question about the relationship? Because she claimed that they would not do it, but they eventually did.
You mentioned they said, who said that?
Moonshine. So it was someone during the
And then for the issue of the Supreme Court, most claims were correct. As Mr. Spiegelman said, there was one Republican senator who voted against Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation. And the other thing that we wanted to mention was that while David's claim about Biden saying that he would tell voters after the election is true, he did say that. He later walked back that issue and said that he would tell people before the election. Now, it's October 28th and the election is, a couple days away, so whether he actually does that is unclear at this point.
How many votes have already been casted? I mean, it's a little.
Yes.
It's a little late.
We're
little late.
not talking about whether he's right or wrong in that situation. However, it is important to know that he later did bring that back. So
But no,
David's
it's-
claim is true, but just so everybody is aware, he did walk that back.
Okay, any other fact check? Okay, so now this question will be to the Democratic side first. We're going to move to a topic that's probably near and dear to everybody's heart here, the cost of college education. Okay? To the Democratic side, Vice President Biden has said that community college should be free to all students, and that state universities should be free based on income. My question to the Democratic side is, again, who's going to pay for this? Where is the revenue for it? And is this a step towards socialism to the Democratic side?
I think that equal access to education is not socialism. There are children at the school who simply cannot afford college. They cannot afford a higher education. I think that giving them an equal opportunity through the taxes that were, aforementioned, with the people that make more than $400,000 a year pay higher taxes, that would benefit the economy. In turn, Joe Biden could use that money from those taxes to pay for the college fund.
If I may add, America currently spends $30,000 per student on average, which is the second most in the world. So clearly there is not a funding problem, because there are countries that rank well below us in terms of their education funding, yet they somehow manage to have free state college. I have a few numbers here. In Canada, one of the University of Toronto, a top international university, 5,000 USD a year. ETH Zurich, another top international university in Switzerland, 1,600 a year, and even Oxford in the UK is 11,700 per year. These are all domestic prices. So I ask, if we have such a massive amount of funding in our education system, how are we consistently ranked lower, and how are our prices so much higher than all the other countries in the world?
I would like to add that regardless of all of the other factors, this proposal would not be a step towards socialism. This is the slippery slope logical fallacy. The idea that it's equivalent to saying that, if we ban assault rifles, that means we're going to take away everyone's guns. It's not a slippery slope, because slippery slopes are not a thing. They don't happen.
Okay. Question to follow to the Republican side. The same questions apply to you. Should community college be free to all students? Should state universities be free based on income? And additionally, and this will be for both of you during the discussion, how do we manage the skyrocketing cost of private college tuition to the Republicans?
The answer to those questions are all no, because education is not a right. And to answer Mr. Schwarn's question, the reason why our student debt crisis is as it is because government guaranteeing student loans only incentivizes banks and universities to jack up prices. Because, for example, when the government says we're going to subsidize pizzas for $5, we're going to buy pizza, right? But then the pizza parlors are like, wait, we're guaranteed to get this money. So these artificially, they can just jack up the prices because they have no incentive to lower the prices. So we got to stop subsidies, and also it's a culture thing. Not everyone should go to college. So majoring in lesbian dance theory will not increase your likelihood of being hired. 41% of college graduates, they have a job that doesn't need a degree, okay? And it's still our time, our non-open scope.
I would just like to say, I think the big question here is why has college become so expensive? Because in 1980, a year of college could cost you $3,400, right? Now the average is $23,000, and we know that that's an average. So we know that it's more in a lot of cases. And again, kind of drawing on what Josh said, that the federal government decided to help students pay for college through student loans and federal financial aid, which has good intentions, but does have that effect that the colleges and universities are going to be getting their money anyway, and therefore they're going to continue to raise their prices because you can't file bankruptcy on a federal student loan. So that does kind of create a situation in which government involvement in the first place kind of worsened the situation, and I don't really agree that further government involvement in the college education system, as in what you're proposing for a free college for everyone type of thing, would have been effective.
Your 2 minutes are up. We go to discussion now. Since the question started with the Democrats, Republicans, if you have questions for them.
I just wanted to readdress the point that I made earlier in the debate. You guys constantly, especially Matthew, refer to the $400,000 tax increase, but that doesn't include the fact that the Biden administration is going to repeal the Trump tax cuts, which saved the average American family.
What does this have to do with college money?
No, I was just addressing something he said, the consequence. Because he proposed that as an idea for college spending.
You said the average American family, but most tax cuts, this was already addressed, have been given to the wealthy and to the poor. So,
Mia, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. Speak a little up.
No, just that the median household income has increased under the Trump administration.
I must ask my Democratic colleagues, do you people believe that education is a right?
Okay,
education is right.
I would like
Right.
to respond to that. Actually, I had something written down. It doesn't matter if education is a right, because equality of opportunity is something that we try and provide in America. And right now we're seeing that in the most competitive universities, 72% of attendees are in the top quintile of wealth. There's clearly some sort of systemic problem where people who aren't wealthy don't have the same access to education in America, and we are doing little to nothing to combat.
Okay, first of all, the U.S. Department of Justice literally found Yale discriminating against Asian Americans. So if you want to talk about
That's affirmative action.
institutional racism,
That has
that is correct.
I'm going to circle I'm going to circle our question back to the cost of
I'm going to get
education.
back to what Kerry said. If you want to talk about the institution, of course, but education is not a right because who's going to pay for it?
So,
You can't just say,
okay, what, I'm sorry, so do you accept his point? It's true.
no, it's not.
You didn't respond to my point, but regardless, you interrupted me. I want to talk to Mia here.
Carrie,
Mia, yeah.
I'm sorry, I just want to say that I agree with you that I do think everyone should have the opportunity to go to school if that's what they wish to do, obviously. I just oppose more so the raising taxes in order to get that accomplished.
I would like to say quickly that it's more complicated than just being able to go to school. There's an issue of the quality of the school that you go to. And this was like one of the key reasons that we got rid of segregation, because black students were not getting the same level of education that white students were.
Again, I'm going to circle the topic back to the cost of education, please.
If I may, I want to point out a trend that I see. Notice how every single question that the Democrats are asked ends with, how are you going to pay for it? So, can you answer the question, or how are you guys going to pay for it?
Right, so the reason that, you know, we largely haven't really said, like, explicitly how we're going to pay for everything is because everything kind of comes back to the fact that we are having increased taxes. We want a budget redistribution. I've consistently demonstrated, at least in this issue, that America has a massive amount of funding dedicated towards education, and it's misallocated completely. So a lot of these cost questions, they're already answered in the fact that we're going to have higher taxes, we're going to have budget redistributions, and we're pointing out extreme issues in the budgeting and the systems that we are using, and we're saying, these are the issues, this is what we need to combat, right? So
you think increasing the amount of people, so you would recommend an increased percentage in taxes that
Yes.
people pay?
Yes.
And you think that's sustainable and that
Yes.
people are going to support that?
yes.
And Mr. Sliker, on what you said,
Go ahead, say it.
I recommend doing school vouchers, because we're all in favor of school vouchers or school choice. The National Bureau of Economic Research did a study in Florida determining that low-income students actually do incredibly well due to school vouchers and school choice. So if you want
Excuse
quality
me,
education,
sorry, this is about college education.
Yeah,
Let's
okay.
stick to college education costs. Mr. Slifer, do you have a comment?
I'm not entirely sure what he was talking about.
you know, you were talking about the inequity of like different
I
kinds
don't know
of
what, I
education.
don't know what, no, but I don't know what vouchers is.
Okay, I can talk about vouchers.
Wait,
Half a
guys,
second.
we're not going
It's
to talk about
a-
vouchers. Vouchers are for
Yeah.
secondary school, elementary
Exactly.
school, middle school. The question is about college
Right.
expense.
I'll ignore that, I'll talk to you about it. Mia, I wanted to address your point. You said something about, you know, since 1980, college has been going up and up, the prices, why is it so expensive? And I actually really like that point because I largely agree. In America, you see that this wasn't always the case. We've always had relatively high, you know, post-secondary options, but the pricing nowadays, it's out of control. And when you really look at why this price has gone up, you see that these colleges, at the end of the day, they're corporations. They're trying to make money. They want to they want to bring in students that will get jobs, that feed money back into their donations, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, you have to have some sort of policy to prevent this from happening. And right now, you see that Republican policy regarding schools and post-secondary options, it's largely like this non-interference thing of, oh, it'll sort itself out, oh, it's fine. They're kind of ignoring the issue. The Democrats have largely gone after this sort of these inflated costs, and they've tried to push some regulation. And I think that that's a problem that you're seeing. Perhaps you should look into some Democrat policy regarding colleges.
The last word on this section will come from the Republican side. Go ahead.
I see your point exactly. I feel as if the government involvement in the first place is what has allowed for the price to go up, because again, the colleges, it was well-intentioned. The Democratic policy was well-intentioned, and we're going to help our kids have money to go to school. But the colleges know this, and whether they're getting their money from the students or the government, they're going to continue to increase it. So that's what I think the issue is, and I don't necessarily agree that more government involvement would be the option, the way to go about this. But I do agree with you in the sense that I think we should be trying to make it education more just accessible to people. And
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Our next topic is a topic that can be a bit sensitive. We're going to be talking about LGBTQ LGBTQ rights. I ask both sides to limit your response to the specific question that I am asking. The question goes to the Republican side first. Is marriage a fundamental right? Yes.
I have a quick question before we.
Oh, I'm sorry, and I meant that there should be a fact check on the last section. I apologize. Were there any fact checks on the last section? Okay. David, what's your
Are we
question?
is COVID on the agenda?
Yes.
All right, just making sure.
Okay. We have 3 more topics. We will deal with LGBT rights, we will deal with COVID, we will deal with foreign policy.
I'm sorry, one more thing. I would just like to remind all of the debaters to please cite their sources, because once again, there have been several things said that the listeners are not sure where they're getting that from. So if you are reading off of the paper and it's not something that you just know off the top of your head, please cite the paper that you're reading off, just as you would in any academic paper. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, again, I'm going to be asking very specific question. I ask that you limit your response to the questions that I'm asking. Okay, the question to the Republican side, is marriage a fundamental right? And what guarantees will a Republican administration make to the LGBT community regarding marriage rights only, marriage rights?
I think that the Constitution, in the Constitution, there is, although it's not explicitly enumerated, we do have privacy protections, right? Right to privacy, and certain things like that. And in accordance to the 9th Amendment, just because a right isn't explicitly stated in the Constitution doesn't mean that we don't have it, right? So we didn't mention marriage, but I do believe that everyone has the right to do so, whether my personal, my morals align with it or not. I think it's the government. The question is really whether the government should impede on this right, and just because it's not explicitly stated in the Constitution, again, doesn't mean a right does not exist.
Anything else from your side?
As the Republicans are libertarian on this issue, we don't care. Like, you can marry whoever you want. We really do not care. What we're concerned about is such as compelling churches to make, like, if a gay couple wants to go to a church, like, should that church has to, like, comply and say, okay, we can marry you guys. Like, we're cool. I don't care. Like, you can marry whoever you want. And yes, marriage is a fundamental right if you want to add. I'll put that on the record.
Gay couples are not like restricted from like going to churches. Like the point of Christianity is really to love on everyone, and from there then we work towards what our moral, what we think our moral principles are, which might not based biblically off of the Bible, but we are called to love on everyone regardless of whether we agree with them or not. So I just don't want to make it seem like we're against like those people who.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's where I
Thank
feel
you. That's your time. Same 2 questions to the Democratic side. Is marriage a fundamental right? And what guarantees will a Democratic administration make to the LGBTQ community with respect to marriage rights only?
I'm really glad that you said that, Mia, your argument. I actually prepared like a whole Christian argument section just for you, but my argument's largely the same as yours. It really doesn't matter what your moral principles are. The government should have no say whether 2 people can marry. All the meta-analysis, all the studies show that there's no difference between heterosexual and same-sex couples. Realistically, I don't care what consenting people do. It's not my business.
Let me just start this off by saying marriage is a fundamental right. You can marry whoever you love. That is fine with me, as long as it's 2 legal and consenting adults in marriage. Regarding privacy, as long as it is 2 legal and consenting adults, whatever you do in the bedroom is what you do, Recently, Pope Francis came out and said that homosexual marriage is fine with him and that he doesn't have anything against it. I believe that is fine, but there have been cases in the past where a homosexual couple has not been allowed to get a wedding cake from a certain bakery, and there's been discrimination against them. It's not exactly widespread. Not everyone is against them, but there is definitely still some tension going on.
If I can, at this moment, just as a moderator, I heard basically the same answer from both sides, right? So I'm going to move into the discussion part if you guys have any discussion back and forth on this issue. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss with Matthew about the cake issue. I've heard that argument, I've seen it before, but not argument, but discussion. So what do you expect the owner of the shop who doesn't want to serve the person, the gay couple, to do? What do you expect to happen? That's the question.
I think that there should be equality. That if a straight couple can walk into that bakery and
That's not
get,
my question. My question is, what do you, if someone.
Again, I am going to ask both teams, both sides, to circle this back to marriage. We can have a discussion in my class on the bakery case that the Supreme Court dealt with, but in here, I'm going to ask you guys just to stick to the topic of marriage, and if there is no genuine dispute between the two sides, we can move on.
I would like to stick to the topic of marriage. It seems to me that a lot of people have been using some vague language, so I want to get some clarification. When you guys state that you think you can marry whoever you want or whoever you love, do you support marrying your sister or your brother or your uncle?
Okay,
or
I'm
your-
gonna.
I don't think that's a bad topic.
Yeah, well, but it's not, we're not gonna go there, okay? We're not gonna go there. Does anybody on either side have any specific issues to get into on the issue of same-sex marriage? No? Anybody on the Democratic side on the issue of same-sex marriage?
I have no disagreement.
Okay. All right, we have two more topics. We are now going to move into the topic of foreign policy. Do we have any fact check on same-sex marriage?
Pope Francis did come out and say that, so just wondering.
I think what he said, Taz, is he said that the Catholic Church was not opposed to civil unions. I don't think he used the term marriage.
Support for same-sex and
Civil unions, right? Which has been the, just so that you guys are aware, because I can't take my teacher hat off, was the standard in the United States until the Obergefell decision, which said that states could not stop same-sex marriage, okay? But yes, he did say civil unions.
but civil union falls under the umbrella of marriage, and marriage falls under the umbrella of civil union.
I don't disagree, but he was very careful not to use the term marriage. Right. Okay, we're moving now into foreign policy. It'll be the same question for both sides. What is the greatest foreign policy threat facing the United States right now, and what do we need to do about it? Your time begins.
Right now, I would say the greatest foreign policy threat threatening America right now is China. We're seeing that China is expanding its economic influence in the Pacific, into Europe. They're blocking trade with India through supporting military coups in Sri Lanka. And I think that the U.S. right now, they need to turn to our Western allies. We need to turn back to NATO. We need to turn back to the TPP. We need to build these strong trade networks in order to oust China from the economic influence that they have been taking from us over the past 4 years of the Trump presidency.
We've seen that trade wars with China have done nothing beneficial for the United States economy. And while our economy is still in a decently sized recession, their economy is booming compared to ours.
On the topic of trade war, we've seen that Trump's trade war was absolutely abysmal. It cost us nearly 300,000 jobs. It's estimated that it would cost us $360 billion by the end of 2020. That's from Bloomberg. And the U.S. companies were primarily paying for the U.S. tariffs, with the cost estimated at nearly $46 billion. It was wholeheartedly a failure both economically and for domestic production. And this is not the way that we need to combat China, which I believe is our biggest threat.
I mean, I understand I'm on the Democratic side, but if I were to play devil's advocate, I'd like to point out that I think that, well, first of all, the United States has been participating in a lot of neo-colonialism, and maybe this isn't the right path for our country. I mean, why bother with dollar diplomacy when gunpoint diplomacy is faster and simpler?
Okay? Same question to the Republican side. What is the greatest foreign policy threat to the United States, and how do we deal with it?
I don't think there's a single pinpoint greatest threat. I think there's multiple threats. And I think when you look at the difference in administrations, which is what the debate's about, I think you see a large contrast in the ability to deal with situations. First, I'd like to point out the China situation. Trump's the first president, not the first president, but he directly stood up to China and Russia. While the Obama administration only provided humanitarian aid, President Trump authorized the selling of actual military equipment to Ukraine to help defend against Russian aggression. Also, when we look at it, we see that with another issue like terrorism, and we'll get to China, but with an issue like terrorism, but when Trump took administration, I believe that this, you can fact check this. I believe that the ISIS caliphate was as large as the state of Pennsylvania. Since then, we have dismantled the ISIS caliphate. Since then, we killed Soleimani, we killed al-Baghdadi with zero. When we killed al-Baghdadi, there was 0 military casualties. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Something that the Obama administration promised to do. They never did that. It was the killing of the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS is something that we needed to do, and that the Trump administration effectively did. And we defeated ISIS.
Yeah,
And then on the China issue.
Biden has been really weak on foreign policy-wise. He let Dmitry Medvedev invade Crimea, and plus he's also the big guy. I'd like to know what is your response to that. He's getting a 10% cut since he's the big guy. How is he going to be tough on China, since you're so concerned about the People's Republic, since he's getting money from them? Okay, and also he's just very weak policy-wise. He let Russia invade Crimea. He didn't do anything. He said Russia was on the wrong side of history. He let them walk in.
Okay, the 2 minutes is up. You guys have discussion. First question from the Democrat side.
Oh, is it our side?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, wait, so what do you mean by he's the, quote, big guy?
I'm using the direct quote that Hunter Biden used, like with a Chinese company that had ties with the Chinese Communist Party. It was confirmed that Joe Biden was the big guy getting a 10% cut. It was confirmed.
I'm the
If
big
we're talking
guy.
about big guys, I
Hunter
mean-
Biden's not the one.
Yes, no, but Joe Biden is getting money. He's getting money.
What's that? We're talking about Eric and Donald Trump Jr. Then they have done just as bad.
Okay, tell me
business
what.
deals.
Like, I was
Okay,
like,
okay.
Whoa. One at a time. Go ahead.
You said something.
Can you give an example?
Give some example.
They have done business
Like
deals
what?
with Russia in the past. It was published on CNN.
What specific example?
Let's see. Do you have an example? Would you want one example?
No. It's going to be one person at a time. Go
Can we
ahead.
have one specific example?
Yeah.
I don't have a specific example. I know they have done it in the past.
Hey, I just need to back him up. I also don't have specific examples on that, but Trump has engaged in relationships with Russia and China. He is not exactly like the person you want to back when we're talking about who isn't influenced by China.
Also, China's not the
If we
biggest.
could get a fact checker on that, really,
Which
big-
brings us
The big guy.
sure, that Trump has engaged with diplomatic relations between Russia and China. He's not like completely, distanced himself.
Wait, what's
I
your
mean,
question?
President.
Yes, I know. Joshua's making this, you guys are making this claim like one specific example. There's plenty out there. I happen to not have.
Joshua,
I'm not
do you
denying
have
it.
a question then that they can
Okay, I do have a question. You think China is the biggest threat?
Yes.
Well, China has time on their side. I think Russia is the biggest threat because they're actually impeding on our democracy. And actually, it wasn't towards the Republicans we found out recently. They're actually helping the Democrats. They've not, because Russia is actively, starting proxy wars. They're actually impeding in Eastern Europe. What's your source? What's your source? I'll let the fact checkers deal with that.
So you don't have any evidence?
Excuse me. The fact checkers asked if you're going to make factual arguments that you had factual sources.
What specifically?
I'll respond to your point. I'll respond to your point regardless of its factual accuracy. I agree. Russia is in Eastern Europe right now, and Russia is threatening democracies. And I actually wanted to respond to David on that and say, David, when you were talking about how Trump was the first president to stand up to China and Trump supported Ukraine, I want to say that's one of the few things that I agree with Trump with. It's been far too long that we've let the U.S. go without standing up to China, and we've been sitting back and letting Russia, get its little tendrils in Ukraine. It's really, we'll have to agree. But on the topic of, China isn't a bigger threat than Russia because Russia is seriously in Eastern Europe. China owns the majority of Australian water supply. China owns, massive amounts of wind and solar energy in Europe, of the European Union. They've acquired the Switzerland, agricultural giant Syngenta. They are clearly making economic influences across the world. They're inciting trade wars. If you look at Sri Lanka, they've established these ports all around India to block it off because India is its #1 GDP competitor on their home continent. It's clear that China has a much greater economic influence and much greater potential than Russia. So while I agree that Russia is still a threat, China is by far.
I'm not denying that China is a threat. I'm simply asking, what is the Biden administration going to do since their
The
record
Biden
is weak?
administration has planned to return back to its Western allies in NATO and the European Union, and I agree that enforcing these stronger ties and getting back this economic influence that China has been taking from us would be beneficial to our stance in terms of influence against
When
China.
you say return to our allies, we're still in NATO.
I just wanted to make we're just going to end up talking about China for a little time, and that's not all foreign policy. I wanted to talk about the Iranian nuclear deal for a moment. President Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal, also called the Joint Comprehensive Plan for Action, which would allow Iran to build a nuclear bomb within the next 5 years.
It's true.
So that's what it's called.
That's a truth.
I don't understand.
So
We have
can you-
about 1 minute left in
So
this
can
session.
you just quickly address why going back into a similar deal with them would be beneficial? for
Yes,
us?
actually, I can address this. So what we saw before the Iran nuclear deal was that they were still building nuclear weapons, but not under U.S. sanctions. What the Iran nuclear deal allowed America to do was allowed us to have exert some sort of direct control onto Iran without having to use these spy networks and like actually looking into what they're doing. We opened some sort of peaceful relationship, and now that the Iran nuclear deal, now that we've withdrawn from it, do you think Iran's going to say, well, that's it, we can't build a nuke
No,
anymore?
they're not gonna have the, they're not gonna have
They don't have
all the, they're not gonna have the sanctions, they're not gonna have
They
funding
don't,
to be able
you're
to
right,
do
you're
that.
right, their resources
It
are
cuts them
limited,
off.
your resources are,
We're
it
them
does
off.
limit their resources, and it does limit their ability to do so. However, the ability is still there, and now the fact that the US doesn't have some sort of influence on that could lead to drastic consequences. I would rather the US have some sort of strong control over people who we feel threatened.
That's,
Okay,
that's what I
okay,
said.
okay. Time's up on this unit. Anything from the fact checkers?
Yes, David, you mentioned you wanted a fact check for, did you say you wanted a fact check?
I don't remember, it was either one of the thing.
All right, well, I'm pretty sure you were basically saying that the trade wars in China,
Something that Matthew said.
he said that the trade wars with China provided nothing beneficial to the country. Is that what you were?
I don't remember.
Well,
Honestly,
I think it was the ISIS caliphate thing was as big as the state.
No, that was something I said. It was, yeah,
What
oh,
he
that was
said-
correct?
What he said about the trade wars with China having nothing beneficial is also correct, as there's been a stock plummet by 2%, tariff raises on both sides.
That's probably not what I was trying to say. Just
Okay.
ignore what I said.
Okay.
Anything else,
Yeah,
Nicole? or
one more
Annalise?
thing. So the Trump business deals with foreign policy, there are several articles outlining how foreign countries have influenced his business in a beneficial way, including foreignpolicy.com and New York Times.
Did you look into the Hunter Biden thing like we asked?
Yeah,
What do you want to fact check on?
Guys, let the fact checkers talk, please.
So, I'm not sure which claim you're specifically referencing for the Hunter
Well,
Biden thing.
he was,
Because there have been several claims told us, so if you would like to provide us a list of
Oh, yeah.
fact check.
I think I might have expected a fact check on Joshua's thing about Trump being, or Biden being some big guy or whatever.
Yeah, what were you talking about?
He was, no,
Let's start with the Hunter Biden claim. So, was there a specific claim that you wanted us to fact check? Because Hunter
Well,
Biden
I
as
think
a
Luke wants to
whole.
fact check. But,
you mentioned something about 10%.
yeah, he got a 10% cut. Joe Biden, he's the big guy. You can fact check that right now.
10%.
I think that's going to be very much driven by the source that you're looking at, and I don't want to run down a rabbit hole. I want to keep moving because we've been at this quite a while. Okay? I love the spirited discussion. I think you guys are doing wonderfully. Let's move on to our last topic. Okay? The last topic is going to be COVID. Okay? The question will start with the Democratic side.
They just started on the foreign policy.
What?
Yeah,
They just started on foreign policy. Like the last topic, they started off, so it would be us.
It's happened
You guys
before
said
side
it
too.
2 times in a row earlier.
Well, I'm trying to give you guys the last word because you had the first word. But if you would prefer to start, I'll start with you. It's fine.
I don't mind.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
either whatever.
All right. So I'll start with the Democrats on this side. COVID, of course, is the crisis facing the world at this moment. Hindsight, as we all know, is 2020. But nonetheless, the question still stands. What will a Democratic administration do differently than a Republican administration in handling COVID response in the United States?
Well, for one, Joe Biden has mentioned that he would listen to doctors such as Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the doctor that the president has currently, he has dismissed it in the past, and he does not listen. As a matter of fact, the chief of staff of the White House, Mark Meadows, mentioned that the White House just simply could not deal with coronavirus anymore. They have let this pandemic grow completely out of proportion. They have done nothing to stop it, and unless we can re-elect the president that will actually listen to medical and health officials and Joe Biden, then we will get nothing done.
Right. And if I may comment, we see that consistently left-leaning governments are so much more effective at combating coronavirus. According to a study, I'm going to start my
Excuse me,
study.
don't interrupt.
According to a study from North Carolina, the COVID-19 cases per capita in states governed by a Democratic governor and legislator have been significantly lower than the rates in states with a Republican governor and legislator. And if I could show you a graph, I'd show it to you. It's absurd, the disparity. The Democratic policy regarding COVID has been earlier than the Republican policy. we've enforced mask mandates, we've been pushing for social distancing, whereas the Republican policy, at least the current GOP and the current administration, has kind of taken a step back. Trump has been quoted as saying, I've tried to downplay it. I don't want my country to have a cheerleader that takes a knee when we get injured. I want a coach who brings us off the field and gets us back in the game. Trump and the GOP has consistently avoided any sort of a policy regarding the stop of COVID.
May I interrupt? Because I think that this will affect the debate. Anthony Fauci and Trump's relationship has been changed from, has gone down from support to disdain. And Trump recently mentioned in the debate that he thinks that Fauci may be a Democrat, undermining his credibility. So I just wanted to put that out there for.
Okay, and hang on, the 2 minutes has elapsed, so now I will turn the question to the Republicans. The question is, again, hindsight is 20/20. Knowing what you know now, would a Republican administration, if reelected for another 4 years, change anything that you did? And most specifically, will a Republican administration commit to a national mask mandate? You have 2 minutes.
Before we go into that, I wanted to address his claims that Trump did listen to Anthony Fauci. Simply not true. He's listened to it many times. And I also want to start off by talking about some facts about the virus. On January 31st, 2020, Trump instituted a restriction ban on travel from China. When he did this,
Say your source on when he listened.
It's true.
you can look it up. I mean, it's a fact.
No, when he listened to Trump, Trump listened
I can give you a source on Twitter of Biden saying that it was xenophobic when he wanted.
Guys, you'll have discussion time.
Yeah, it's our time. All right. So I also can list the source, Joe Biden's Twitter, when he called it xenophobic, that he was banning people from China. We look at the response. So let me take you back to the beginning. All right. We start. The first problem was the World Health Organization and the false reporting of the cases. And now, okay. Then we go to America's response. All right. We look at once the virus comes here, we have problems with hospital beds. President Trump immediately mobilized the military to construct 2 hospital facilities in New York and elsewhere to be enough beds. Next fear, ventilators. President Trump pursued leaders of the American industry to fast-track the manufacture of ventilators. Soon there were enough ventilators. Then he left the rest of the local governments. We see the greatest mobilization since World War II. We see 5 companies already in phase 3 of a vaccine. We see, and then also, you guys mentioned with the response to a virus. In 2009 with the swine flu, there were 60 million Americans who contracted. I believe Ron Klain was the chief of staff of the Obama administration. I'm not sure, but Ron Klain
He was the Ebola czar.
Huh?
He was the Ebola czar.
Yeah, well, he said that the administration did everything wrong in handling this, in handling the Biden Obama administration. They left the stockpile empty. They left the country with 60 million infected. Just imagine if the disease was as infective as COVID was. You see 3 million.
Okay, your 2 minutes is up, and I'm going to ask you before we move on to please answer the specific question. Will a Republican administration commit to a national mask mandate?
I mean, it's not my place to say what their administration is going to do if they're elected. It's like how we don't know if Joe Biden's going to pick the courts.
Okay, you guys now have discussion. Go ahead.
All right.
Wait, the Democrats will ask, and then Republicans.
I'll just start off by asking, okay, you can't speak for the Republican Party, but you're representing the Republican side. Would you personally commit to a mask mandate?
I think I would. I think like a national mask mandate. I think I would leave it up to the
Okay.
states.
Can I ask you a question? So, in your speech, you seem to focus on the fact that a lot of things have been done.
Yes.
It was the greatest mobilization since World War II. Nobody's arguing that nothing has been done. The issue is, has enough been done? And it seems to me, the fact that you've avoided discussing the adequateness of this issue suggests that you know that what has been done is not enough. So I want to have you clarify exactly what your position on that is.
So you want me to answer the question of, do I believe we've done enough with the virus? I think there's always things that we can do more. I think hindsight is something, we're looking at this now saying, we should have done more then, but who was to say that we should have done it then? And I think hindsight, I think we're looking, I misspoke there, but I think when we're looking at hindsight, yes, I think we should have done more, but back then, I wouldn't put this.
And
Looking back on it,
We
looking
had
back
to
on it.
warn about this bias, we did not act on it.
Let me respond. The Democrats said we proposed policies that would have been effective. We did know the Republicans were on the dissent side. You implemented the incorrect policies. This isn't some hindsight like, well, nobody could have known. We knew. We were right.
What
Well,
what though?
in
It's
January,
overconfidence. Okay, well, I've already cited.
In the sense that you're assuming that you could have predicted what had happened, and that's exactly
No.
what hindsight bias is. It's a bias, and it's called the I knew it all along bias because it's after something has already happened, you then deem, oh, I could have predicted that. And
No, but that's not what he was
common
saying.
sense
That's
is
not what he was
common.
saying.
After the fact,
Excuse me.
common sense is common, makes sense. After the fact, something has happened. So I think it's just unfair to assume.
It's just how they downplayed it in the beginning. They
Hold on.
can't explain that the virus is
Please, let me respond.
down,
Let me
please.
respond to our point specifically, guys. I already cited. It's been shown that democratic states have done better. Our policies were better. It's like demonstrable. So I'm wondering, why do you claim that you guys have the better policies when they haven't been as effective?
Well, I think we're talking about the Trump administration, the Trump is the Republican, and Luke said that you guys were saying that the issue wasn't that we didn't do anything, but Matthew in fact said that the Trump administration did nothing.
You were inadequate would be my word.
Okay, yeah, but there's a lot that he's done, and I can read off of the list from if you want the fact sheets.
Right, but you look at other countries and they've done better. We have done extremely poorly relative to countries that are comparable to us, and I'm wondering how do you support this? There
How do you
clearly
define poor, Terry? How do you define poor?
number
He's
of
let
deaths,
thousands
number
of
of
Americans
cases,
die.
contact rate.
Well, you know
to the
that in
extreme.
regards to the number of cases,
I mean,
because
he
we
has.
have lost the greatest testing
Okay,
we have more cases and more testing.
I have to just say, that's just factually incorrect. The more testing does not lead to more cases. I think David mentioned this earlier with like the WHO misreporting. The WHO has not misreported data on the U.S. Are you talking
I'm
about
talking
this?
about China. I'm talking
let me make
about
an analogy for that.
Yeah, not the one who was.
Okay, fair.
have 1 minute left.
Matthew Lewis was shouting that they let 1,000 people die. 1,000 people die.
Yes.
Can we let him?
All right, can we talk, let's not make this personal, let's.
No, it's not
let's take
personal.
it
It's
off.
not, this is personal.
Can I get on the thing about the more tests leading to more whatever?
I didn't say that, okay. The United States has had a lower mortality rate in Europe during the pandemic than other countries, and you
That's
clearly,
not relevant.
it's,
Wait,
it's.
the mortality rate is the.
You didn't say anything.
Wait,
about
okay,
that
but the
earlier.
mortality rate's not relevant to number of, like, percentage of people who have gotten cases, like, per capita, and percentage of people who have died. The mortality rate is how, like, the percentage of people who catch COVID and die. That's not like, this isn't like some gotcha, right? We have more cases and we have more deaths than any country that is comparable to us, and it's a result of the Republican Party's inadequate policy.
does
Well,
China
that
work
is
in?
wrong because the infection rate is indeed going up, but the death rate is actually going down.
Also, can we
Yeah,
get
how do you
fact
enforce
check?
the
Get a fact check on
It's
this.
like, you guys doesn't like respond.
Okay,
Well, I would love to fact check.
time's up. Anything from the fact checkers on the COVID section?
There have been several requests for fact checks, but none of them are very clear on what exactly you're asking us to check.
Could be left out.
Can I please be, I can be more clear if you
All right,
don't mind.
yes, please. Taz, can you get a fact check on the amount of deaths?
What does that even mean?
Okay.
Under the Trump
How many
administration,
deaths have there
administration
been?
included?
You don't
Oh, it's about
I would like a
220,000.
You don't let people die.
Nicole, I would like a fact check on the statement that we have more deaths as a result of the fact that we have more tests.
I think
I
it's
didn't
a
say that.
misunderstanding.
I didn't say that.
She didn't say that.
Okay, guys, listen. Hey, listen. Guys, say what you're gonna say?
Mr. Spiegelman, may she finish her point about what Carrie was arguing earlier?
Yes, briefly, please, Nate.
I would just like to address that statement that that's not what I implied at all, that there was a misunderstanding, I guess.
Okay.
What point were you trying to
I did
make?
not say that because we have more testing that we have.
No. What point were you trying to make? Because I must have gotten confused. What were
I
you
mean,
saying?
I was
as a
just
fact check?
addressing the fact that you addressed how we're doing so poorly because of our high number, and I was just attributing our high number to the fact that we have more testing.
Right, I'd like a fact
Okay,
check on that.
hang on,
But it makes sense.
hang
if
on,
we
guys,
have
I'm gonna wrap this up.
No, it's okay. We'll get the
Excuse
fact
me,
check.
I'm gonna get this wrapped up. You guys can talk to the fact checkers after we're done. I want to thank everybody for your spirited engagement and your excellent preparation. It's very inspiring as a teacher to see young, engaged, active citizens. On behalf of the Bipartisan Presidential Commission on Presidential Debates, I want to thank you. I want to remind all of you to vote if you are legally allowed to vote. And good night. Thank you. Wear a mask. Josh, cover up, please.
No, I know what she was trying to say, and I know it's.
Nice job.